Ibrahim Traore has been embroiled in several disagreements and confrontations with press organizations and journalists. These clashes have brought attention to the complex relationship between public figures and the media, shedding light on the challenges and controversies that can arise in the realm of journalism. In today's world, the public needs reliable, unbiased information from journalists and news outlets to function as a watchdog and keep those in power accountable. However, when public figures feel misled or singled out by media coverage, the performance of this function can occasionally result in tensions and disputes. This brings us to our video of today. Traore admits forcibly conscripting an editor as journalist kidnappings rise. But before we continue with this story, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the New Tourist channel to get first-hand information on whatever is happening in Africa. The head of Burkina Faso's government, Captain Ibrahim Traore, made the shocking announcement that he had conscripted a journalist against his will at a time when 4 media workers are currently missing. Reporters Without Borders, RSF, has called on the authorities to stop using these cruel measures, which infringe upon the Burkinabe people's right to information. Shortly after making an address to the Burkinabe public on July 11, Captain Ibrahim Traore announced, "There is a journalist who was recently conscripted because, since 2023, he has spent his time lying." In addition to serving as a warning to media professionals, the military leader's statement confirmed that a journalist had been conscripted into the army. This journalist is said to be Serge Ulan, the editor of the fortnightly L'Événement, who was abducted on June 24 by people claiming to be from the National Intelligence Agency. The head of state also declared that the concerned journalist has been summoned by the gendarmerie, by the Superior State Control and Anti-Corruption Authority, and by all structures to provide proof of what he was saying. The several summonses that Serge Ulan received following the publication in December 2022 of his report on potential embezzlement inside the militia bear striking similarities to the interrogation procedure that is being outlined. When asked for more information, a source close to the president's office said that Reporters Without Borders, RSF, should stick to what the president says. But this same source had assured RSF a few days prior that Serge was safe. Based on the public declarations made by Captain Ibrahim Traore, RSF is fully inclined to think that Serge Ulan is the journalist who was coerced into the army. Analysts say journalists are becoming less and less safe under the country's increasingly authoritarian rule, which is symbolized by this crackdown on them. RSF keeps calling on the government to abandon this policy of press repression, which in the end threatens citizens' rights to free, unbiased, and varied information. Traore's remarks prompted several unnamed journalists in the nation to tell RSF that it was now clear that Serge was at the battlefront and had been enlisted as a volunteer for the defense of the homeland. It has been standard procedure to forcibly conscript government critics and send them to the military camp in Kea for training before their integration into a unit. Bear in mind that suspicions were sparked by Ulan's investigation into the embezzlement of 400 million CFA francs by a senior army officer, meant for the volunteers for the defense of the homeland. A few weeks later, Ulan was questioned by military officials who sought to get details from him regarding his source. Take note that there have been several cases like this in Burkina Faso. Ibrahim Traore, a vocal critic of Burkina Faso's ruling military leaders, received a conscription order on September 7 last year, requesting that the anesthesiologist start a month of military service 4 days later. The doctor was not given a specific time or place to report for duty in the order. A few days later, on September 13, Traore was ambushed by 2 armed men as he was passing between operating rooms at a hospital in Ouagadougou. They then pushed him into a car and transported him to a military base close to Kea in the north. The 38-year-old Traore had denounced the violence linked to Burkina's almost decade-long fight against Islamist insurgents in the West African country. His abduction garnered attention in the local media, contributing to a flurry of stories and declarations from civil society about the forced disappearance of scores of activists, journalists, rights advocates, military personnel, and other opponents of Burkina Faso's military administration over the previous 15 months. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have accused the Burkina Faso regime of abducting and forcing some of its critics into slavery, citing victims and civil society organizations. The military leaders did not respond to calls for comment for this story. We were also unable to locate any official statement from the government to the reports. After serving 3 months of mandatory military duty, Lur was released from the Kea camp and claimed that he was drafted at the same time as 8 other activists and government critics. "They want to silence us," he said during a phone interview in March. "These conscriptions are arbitrary and punitive. Bear in mind that there have been more than 19 abductions since March 2023. Most of these abductees remain unaccounted for." At least a dozen activists, journalists, and opposition politicians were called up in November last year to participate in the campaign to recapture territory from armed Islamist groups that control roughly half the country. In February, Basiru Bajo, an administrator at the General Directorate for National Solidarity and Humanitarian Assistance, was taken from his workplace. The perpetrators were individuals presenting themselves as state security agents, who took him to an unknown destination. Also, note that Burkina Faso suspended French broadcaster TV5 for 6 months for spreading disinformation. The communications regulator accused the channel of spreading malicious insinuations and disinformation about the country's transitional government. It also hit TV5 with a fine of 50 million CFA francs, approximately $82,000. The media outlet faced criticism from the communication regulator for having Newton Ahmed Berry, who headed the Election Commission from 2014 to 2021 and was critical of the military regime on board. Bear in mind that several foreign news outlets, predominantly French, have been closed down temporarily or permanently since Captain Ibrahim Traore took over the country. In April, the military government suspended BBC and Voice of America after broadcasting a report by Human Rights Watch that accused the military of terminating civilians. Take note that it also suspended TV5 for 2 weeks that same month for these very reasons. Human Rights Watch said that the army had terminated over 223 people in areas where there were allegations of collaboration with militants, 56 of whom were minors. International media outlets, such as the Associated Press, covered the story extensively. The suspension reduced the BBC ability to reach audiences with independent and accurate news, but they said they will continue to report on the region in the public interest and without fear or favor. Some people believe that Burkina Faso's journalists shouldn't have to deal with government censorship in addition to the difficulties of covering the nation's insecurity. The director of the Reporters Without Borders Sub-Saharan Africa Bureau, Sadibou Meron, said in April that these suspensions were another blow to press freedom in Burkina Faso. Others believe that some of these news outlets and journalists go beyond what they ought to report. But what is your standpoint? Let us know in the comments below. All this is happening at a time when President Ibrahim Traore has approved and revised a family code that criminalizes homosexuality. This decision makes Burkina Faso one of the 22 out of 54 African countries that do not allow same-sex relationships, with severe penalties such as life imprisonment or termination of victims in some regions. During a recent meeting held by government leaders in Ouagadougou, ministers agreed that the act and related practices will henceforth be punishable by law. Although the specific penalties were not outlined, the text is yet to be approved by the deputies of the Transitional Legislative Assembly. It is important to note that the act was frowned upon in the socially conservative West African state, but it was never outlawed. The military seized power in Burkina Faso in 2022 and has pivoted towards Russia, after drastically reducing ties with former colonial power, France. In August last year, Burkina Faso's Higher Communication Council banned the broadcasting of television channels that promote homosexuality in the country. Officials of the council reported that the step was to protect kids and ensure that television channels created for children and adolescents were free from queer scenes. The complex interactions between public personalities and the media have come to light as a result of Ibrahim Traore's complaints with news outlets and journalists. These disputes bring to light the difficulties and disputes that can occur in the field of journalism, such as claims of prejudice, deception, and the fine line that must be drawn between the right to knowledge and the right to privacy or reputation. Public personalities and the media have a complex relationship in which each party has rights and obligations. Maintaining ethical reporting standards is crucial for news organizations and journalists to guarantee truthfulness, equity, and openness in their reporting. Public personalities also possess the right to voice their grievances and demand equitable treatment in the public domain. Do you think more should be done concerning these abductions in Burkina Faso? Or do you stand with Ibrahim Traore? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the New Tourist channel. Turn on notifications too so you get notified whenever we upload interesting videos like this. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video.